Okay, welcome everyone to today's webinar, Breaking Through the UX Maturity Barrier. And this webinar is being brought to you by Macadamian, a software design and development firm. I'm Lorraine Chapman, Director of Healthcare User Experience at Macadamian, and one of your presenters for today's webinar. I would also like to introduce my co-presenter and colleague, Scott Plewes, VP of User Experience. Before we start, I just wanted to cover a few housekeeping items. First, you should have a control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. Throughout the session, please feel free to submit questions via the chat window. We'll take some time to answer a few questions as we go, and then again at the end of the session. Following the webinar, all registrants will receive a copy of the recording, the slides, along with a PDF of the frequently asked questions received during the Q&A. Okay, so let's get started. As I mentioned, today's webinar is Breaking Through the UX Maturity Barrier. And the first thing I'd like to start off with is kind of a warning and letting you know that we will not be talking about technology today. Our focus today is on people rather than technology. So why focus as an organization on user experience design? That seems to be the main question. Some of the issues that people are currently experiencing today with regards to their products, especially in terms of getting a product out the door with the appropriate user experience. And we've heard from many clients who tell us, we have a process in place, or we have a lone user experience designer, or we tested just before release and we're still having issues. And so that's why we are focusing on people and on how your organization, across the organization, deals with user experience design. So we're looking at people and processes and the level of maturity from a user experience design perspective.
So you probably recognize Bill when he was a little bit younger. I'm not sure if his glasses changed, but he's there in the 90s sometime, and he's holding up, at the time, kind of cutting edge. Windows 95 was a big breakthrough and the world was all excited. And unfortunately for user experience designers at the time, I don't think the user experience was quite where any of us wanted it to be, but it didn't matter so much back then. You didn't actually win a ton by user experience design differentiation. You usually won, in fact, by counting the features on the back of the box the software came in. Now, that's a bit of an extreme view on exactly how it worked, but the balance between functionality and user experience design was weighted much more heavily towards functionality and features back when Bill looked like that and wore those glasses. That's no longer the case, though. I think, and this is software we've worked on, but it's not just software that we've worked on, where user experience has completely changed in terms of the expectations of the consumer and expectations within business. You just can't get away with something just doing something any longer. It has to do something efficiently, or it has to do something easily, or it has to do something where you can learn something very quickly. It's all sorts of different user experience parameters that you might want to measure. But in any case, the bar has certainly been raised on that, and partly from just it getting better in the consumer world. But the bar has been raised in how good you have to be in user experience design to compete in software. And so what we've seen, as I mentioned earlier, it used to be heavily weighted towards functionality when it came to evaluating just how good software was from a user perspective, or from essentially the connection between the business goal and what the user expects, which is the value proposition. And it's no longer just functionality, it's user experience and aesthetics that define the value of a product from a customer point of view. That balance depends a bit on what the context is. Certain industries, it's still more heavily weighted towards functionality. In certain segments of the market, it's more heavily weighted towards user experience or aesthetics. but again, it's not Bill's world anymore from the 90s.
So I know many of you attending today's webinar come from a health experience or a health organization perspective, and one thing we wanted to highlight is that many people talk about how expectations have changed from an enterprise perspective. So consumers have a certain expectation, and when they go to work, they have the same level expectation, and the same is true, of course, for clinicians working in healthcare organizations. So there's that common pattern. Specifically, though, Scott was alluding to the fact that different organizations have different values, and from a healthcare perspective, we see this on two different levels. On the individual level and on the organizational level. And I have to give credit, of course, to Nancy Staggers and Melanie Rodney, who did a UX maturity model for healthcare organizations specifically. And their paper can be found on the HIMSS website, so feel free to take a look at what they said. But this is a chart from their paper. So at the individual level, it supports, of course, increased effectiveness and efficient working by increasing productivity, decreasing errors, and improving cognitive support. So that's what the expectation or value of UX is from an individual level. From an organizational level, increased efficiencies are related to various types of cost reduction. But it should also be noted that the decreased individual errors, which impact patient safety, also accrue to the organization as a whole in improving patient outcomes. So having said that, we identified different values depending on the type of organization. So Scott and I have worked with many different clients over the years and come up with our own version of the UX maturity model. There are many different models out there. This one isn't set in stone. This is just a model that works for us and that we apply to other organizations when we're working with them to assess their maturity level and help them move beyond their current stage. So by all means, do your own research, take a look at the different models, but this is the model that we've come up with and works for us. So obviously there are 5 stages. Stage 1 is the beginning, virtually no user experience maturity whatsoever. It's not even a thought when you're in stage 1, right through to stage 5, of course, which is exceptional, and it permeates every aspect of the organization. So in the next few slides, we're going to take a deeper dive into each of the stages because we've identified different criteria or different elements or characteristics of organizations within each of these stages. So I'll start with stage 1. And as I mentioned, this is truly the beginning stage. UX is not even a concept or a thought really. If they have anything remotely representing user experience, it's typically graphic design of some sort, and the graphic design is applied after the product's built. Just make it look pretty before we push it out the door. But essentially, there is no user experience expertise within the company at all. No thought given to incorporating user input. Usually it's more of a feature-based approach. There's no leadership or adoption and integration of user experience processes, so there's nobody advocating for user experience, and certainly there are no underlying user experience design processes in place. And really at this stage it's because, nothing's really happened to force them to take a closer look at user experience. So the perspective on the business impact seems to be, that there is none at this stage.
So sometimes what happens is, as Lorraine was alluding to, is something changes in the business. In fact, something usually does have to change in the business to start to move into the second stage. Perhaps they lost a sale because their competitor had easier to use or better looking user experience or more modern. We've come across that terminology a lot. And in this stage, in our little metaphor here, the little user experience fish starts to join the group, but it's not really part of the group. So they may hire a consultant, they may bring in an expert in one aspect of user experience design, often visual design, and they start to change user experience design, but they don't have an awareness at an organizational level of what that means, and certainly not integrated into the processes. And as we alluded to, there's the, so we have the resource aspect of those three things that we alluded to in the model, but the timing is still quite late, and the leadership and culture aren't behind user experience, not in a malicious way, but often just because they don't know what it is, which is why we've called it awareness. The organization is just becoming aware of what user experience is. In stage 3, and this is the most common stage that we see, it's when the organization is starting to, in places, adopt user experience design. And when we say in places, it may mean that the techniques are in places. It may be in a large organization that they're just within certain departments it's being adopted. And we've illustrated this by some of the little fish friends here having orange elements, but not all of them. So there may be some leaders who are, for instance, behind user experience design, but other leaders in the organization or influencers who aren't. It's not really embedded. It's not a natural part of design and development at this point, and it's easy for that little fish to swim off another direction and not actually be part of the school. It's critical that certain things happen to, in fact, progress into the next stage, such as a highly successful project that really has used most, if not all, elements of proper user experience design, which then lead into the 4th stage.
Right. So stage 4 is what we call the realizing stage. And as Scott alluded to, stage 3 is characterized by these small successes. And now in stage 4, the successes are happening across the organization, and so people are on board, they're thinking about user experience design, and it's virtually in every group within the organization, even if you have multiple products. So the timing of the user experience design activities is happening up front, so very early in the product development process. They typically have all of the different skill sets to make that happen. They're incorporating user input not just after it gets out to the field, but before the next release or as they're coming up with new concepts. So it's really well integrated. It's adopted and integrated across the organization. And the main reason is because they realized that it has a huge impact on the bottom line, on their business. Stage 5, it goes beyond that, even one step further. And the main difference here is that it's not just happening, realizing it's happening sort of on a group-by-group basis. Everybody's doing it, but it's in my team or within my group I'm doing this. In stage 5, it's really everybody is thinking about that unified user experience. So we're one company even if we have multiple products, but they're also thinking about the customer experience, not just the user experience. And so stage 5 companies are looking at all the different touch points. It doesn't actually have to be a product, right? So it could be your call-in support center, it can be your website, what have you. They're really thinking big and looking at the larger company and the different touch points as an extension of the user experience. So they're really thinking across the entire customer experience, and that's really what differentiates stage 5 companies. So we'd like to take a second now to send you a poll. And we just, you've heard us talk about the different stages and what they mean. And so we're really interested in finding out where you think you are as an organization. Are you stage 2? Are you stage 4? Or a few of you out there stage 5. So if you could just take a few moments to answer the poll, we'll get back to you with some of the results. Okay, and looks like everybody has polled or answered our poll. And from what we can tell, certainly about 29% of you indicate that you're in stage 2 for UX maturity, and the majority of agree. And Scott and I are both looking at each other and nodding, because yes, this is indeed indicative of what we see with our clients, is that many people are in the stage 3, and this is why we call it the barrier, and why we titled our webinar "Breaking Through the Barrier," because this actually is where many organizations get stuck. And so obviously the next question, of course, is, well, why do we get stuck? How can we break through the barrier? And so Scott and I wanted to take the next few moments to talk about why you do get stuck and what we see as some common criteria or characteristics.
So one of the things that often comes up as a leading indicator of whether you're going to get through the barrier or not get through the barrier has to do with the leadership and the culture. But behind the leadership acting in a certain way, of course, is almost always a business driver. And that's why our first point is around the fact that there has to be a business reason. If there's not a business reason, then of course the people who are making business decisions are not going to push for change, UX or otherwise. And related to that, of course, is not just one or two leaders saying, yeah, I'm good with it, but you actually need somebody driving it, somebody who's a champion, who can actually influence the company, can make decisions, bring other key leaders on board, and so forth. We mentioned earlier the fact that one of the things that we see often to get people through the barrier is the fact that they pick a single project that's a success. Once you have a very successful project in the organization, everybody wants to emulate that success. People will ask, how was that success created? Even if they had no interest in user experience before, they have interest in successful projects. So that idea of don't boil the ocean is very important. Rather do something really well in a couple of places and then have it, I don't want to say viral, but well, I just said it. But it does kind of go viral in a sense. So a success, they naturally hop on board the bandwagon.
The other thing that we've noticed is that people are still thinking in terms of a solution rather than starting with the problem. And so the longer you spend in that problem space and utilize either domain knowledge that you have or gather user feedback. So identify what are the outstanding questions, where are the gaps, and then using appropriate methods to fill in those gaps. And often that comes with gathering user feedback. And so one of the key things that we see with organizations who can sort of, again, break through that barrier is that they're doing more and more upfront user requirements research. So not just, testing as they design, but, to ensure that, okay, yes, this works. They can, figure out how to accomplish a specific task. But more than that, really understand what the problem is in the first place and design a solution around that with the full understanding of what the user requirements are. And then related to that, of course, is that while visuals do matter, absolutely, they're not enough, right? And so it's related to the making sure you have the appropriate skill sets to get that right product out the door. So making sure you have a design researcher who is collecting the appropriate information and feeding it in a meaningful way to your interaction designers who use that to inform the design. And then, of course, the visual designer plays a huge role in making that design come to life. And so there are three different aspects of user experience that need to come into play there. There's also, in terms of the goals, one of the key things we find is when people start to establish success metrics up front and then track those through the product development process, they're more successful. The product is more successful. And so up front, identifying what are the success metrics for this project and for this product, and making sure those success metrics are aligned with specific business goals. And then throughout the product development process, checking in to make sure, translating those into specific user experience goals, and checking in to make sure that you are aligned. And that you're tracking against those specific user experience goals. So if it's to make it more discoverable or cut down on the training required, then you need to measure those, quantitatively measure those, because you won't know that you're achieving those goals unless you're measuring them. And so sometimes that means establishing a baseline. Right now, we deliver 2 days of training to get the users up to speed and efficient in the using the product. Maybe the new goal is we want to cut that down to 2 hours. And so you need to build in mechanisms that allow you to test against that baseline and then iterate and make sure you're changing the design accordingly to achieve those goals.
And then with regards to the last point, the rinse, repeat, and promote, I think it's self-evident, but one of the things we'd like to emphasize is the promote aspect. Until something is really embedded into the culture of an organization, anything, whether it's UX or something else, you need to keep reminding people because it wasn't there before for a reason. It wasn't habituated. They didn't understand it. Different people come in and so forth. So there really is an aspect of selling it in a positive way, which is usually just educating and ensuring that it connects to people's goals. That is ongoing. So even once you've done some successful projects, everybody's happy with it, continue to promote those projects and the successes that have come out of them. And around that idea, people often ask us, if you're going to pick one thing to start, how would you start? How would you get this going? Lorraine, right back at the beginning of the presentation, mentioned the fact that it's about people working together on this, that you can't just hire a UX designer and expect he or she will somehow transform that company. You need the product managers and owners, you need project managers, technology guys, architects, sales, etc. You need all these different people support involved in the process. And when you do pick one of those key projects to work on, something that we highly recommend and that we've done successfully is you get, for a day or two, those key stakeholders together and talk about those things that you know matter to everybody in the organization. What's the business context? What are you trying to achieve? What's success mean? How would you measure it? What's the value proposition to the user? How do you know about the user? This is an actual shot from a work we did with a company where people are participating in answering those questions. And when you have those discussions, you come up with a plan and an approach and a mindset even where people are all aligned and behind what you're doing. Not only we find in user experience, but in the product strategy as a whole. So these workshops to kick off projects that involve the overall product strategy in a way. We focus on the UX strategy because that's often the new part. We found super successful, and we'd suggest that you guys do it and get those stakeholders together to do something like this to get a project going if you want it to be a success.
And that will help you get to the next level no matter what stage you're in. So thank you everyone for joining us. We really appreciate your time today, and we'd love to hear from you about what you thought about the webinar and some of your thoughts around user experience maturity model. Thank you.